I'm Mike Hsu, Acting Comptroller of the Currency. I'm excited to introduce you to my new discussion series on financial health called Vital Signs. And I want to take a minute to explain why we're doing this and what it's all about. I believe that the concept of financial health has the potential to improve how we see and think about financial products and services, and in doing so, improving outcomes for consumers and communities. There's a tendency to see financial products through a black and white lens. I have some sympathy for this. As we learned in the fallout from the 2008 financial crisis, there were a lot of products out there that badly hurt people, communities, and the economy. They never should have existed or been allowed to grow. On the other hand, the traditional financial system has, at best, a mixed record when it comes to meeting the needs of vulnerable consumers and communities. Innovative and better products and services that empower the unbanked and underbanked are needed if progress is to be made. In some cases, a black and white approach is needed. What I found over the past year, though, is that good policymaking often requires sophistication and nuance. Small dollar loans, overdraft programs, earned wage access. These and other products and services can pose grave risks or provide critical lifelines to consumers. We need ways to assess and structure them so that they minimize harm and maximize empowerment. A black and white approach can't do that. Applying a financial health lens allows for more sophisticated analysis and discussion. Instead of debating, for instance, whether a given product is good or bad, the financial health lens forces a more nuanced discussion of harms and benefits. Does a given product help people to make ends meet and pay their bills on time? How? Does it put them into high-cost debt traps, impeding their ability to save and invest? How? Does it enable them to borrow responsibly? How? Ideally, we'd have an easy, reliable way to monitor the financial health of consumers and communities, and to assess the financial health impacts of particular products and services. In medicine, this is accomplished by checking patients' vital signs: temperature, heart rate, blood pressure, breathing. Imagine if we could develop similar vital signs for people's financial health. My goal with this discussion series is to engage with thought leaders and practitioners to discuss top-of-mind consumer and banking issues and apply a financial health lens to elevate the debate and towards better outcomes. I hope you'll join us and let us know what you think. In the meantime, you can reach out to us at financialhealth@occ.treas.gov. Thanks, and I hope you enjoy the discussions. Today, we're going to talk about cryptocurrencies and communities of color. And before I introduce our distinguished guests, I'm going to set the stage with a story. So about a year ago, when I took office, cryptocurrencies and the digital asset space were rapidly growing, getting a lot of attention. And I remember coming across a report. This was preparing for an event, coming across a report from, I believe it was Morning Consult. And they had a survey. And they were surveying the fully banked, the underbanked, and the unbanked. Do you own cryptocurrency? And the statistics I almost fell out of my chair. 10% of the fully banked said yes, they own some. 11% of the unbanked said yes. 40% of the underbanked said yes. And I thought, surely that's got to be a misprint. Put in some inquiries, not a misprint. About a week later, there was a Harris poll, this time done by race. Do you own cryptocurrency? And for Blacks, Hispanics, Asians, all those percentages were higher, significantly higher than they were for whites. And all of those have been kind of reinforced, confirmed with later surveys and polls and things like that. And of course, it leads to the question, why? Because at that time, as I was looking at that space, it's a super volatile asset with lots and lots of issues around it. Why did it have this profile in terms of ownership? So I started asking a lot of questions and asking around. And it turns out it's quite complicated, actually. And I think that as a person in the government who's always looking, how do we protect people and communities, and at the same time reduce inequality, provide for opportunity, there's something complicated going on here. And so that then led to a discussion with John Hope Bryant, who's with us today, CEO, founder of Operation Hope, And he and I had talked about financial literacy, and crypto came up, and there was immediate engagement on, hey, we need to talk about this. And then later on, I'm listening to a FinTech Beat podcast with Dr. Chris Brummer, and Professor Tanya Evans is on that, spoke very eloquently about what's going on in that space in the communities. And I thought, okay, I really need to bring John and Tanya together so we can talk about this through the lens of financial literacy and financial health. And so thank you very much for joining us. And what I'd like to do first is just maybe turn it to each of you and just tell me a little bit about your story of how you came to crypto. And Tanya, if I can start with you.
Sure. First of all, thank you so much for having this conversation. I think it's critically important for the reasons that you've mentioned in terms of financial education and awareness month, and really capping this particular month off with a really critical and essential conversation of just what the landscape is right now, what it means writ large, but in particular for systemically marginalized communities of color, and what are the pros and the cons. I come to this conversation as an educator. I'm a tenured professor at Penn State Dickinson Law School. I'm also a co-hire at the Penn State Institute for Computational and Data Sciences, the former chair of the Maker Foundation, charged with the full decentralization of the Maker DAO. And I come to this personally in terms of trying to figure out what this asset class is, and the lawyer and educator in me, I wasn't sure in the beginning what it might mean for me personally, but I was clear that the next wave of lawyer needs to be conversant in order to protect people and to encourage not only the innovation, but also investors and consumers in this space, and connecting with the administrative state as well about what the regulatory landscape might be, and also on the Hill what the legislative landscape might be. And so I'm really interested in what this technology means as a potential to serve as a matter of economic empowerment and economic justice in the space in ways that have failed communities of color in the past. And so that's why I'm so excited about having this conversation.
John?
First of all, she's a bad sister. You heard those credentials? It's just,
and that's just the tip of the iceberg, by the way.
Bad sister. In my neighborhood, that would be spelled as S-I-S-T-A, by the way. She's just really smart. And if you haven't watched the podcast interview that the comptroller mentioned, you should. I've watched it a couple of times, and I learned. And you're a visionary. Thank you for doing this. You're one of the lead federal regulatory voices in the financial infrastructure in the largest economy in the world, I might add. Biggest economy who's put their toe into this conversation, to the water of this conversation, which I think takes courage and vision. So thank you and the agency for doing this. It's extremely important. I came to this kicking and screaming to drag me to this promised land. I got enough problems. 41% of black folks own a home in comparison to 74% of their mainstream white counterparts. You want to build wealth, the number one way to do it is it ain't rocket science. Own where you live. There's not enough, they're not growing any more land. Just buy some, rent it, rehab it, rent it and hold it, or just live in it and watch it appreciate over time. You know what, 20% of us black people are, in the stock market for one of the largest run-ups in value in modern history. Interest rates at a record low, but we're not refinancing everything in sight. I'd refinance my kids if I had some. I mean, these interest rates, and now they're going up. Small business creation, but, almost 3 million black businesses, but 96% of them don't have an employee. We have enough problems. I'm trying Operation Hope is trying to attack all these things that, to get us to a level playing field of access to capital and opportunity and get our credit scores up. So here comes this new topic. I didn't want to deal with it. Just to be honest, just real talk. And of course, when you're being run out of town, get in front of the crowd, make like a parade. Everywhere I go, folks want to talk about this. Yeah. I can't go home. My wife told me, I told her I was coming to see you. My wife, Shatra, told me she put $1,000 in Bitcoin and it's worth 40 grand now. I'm like, what what I got? Now she's excited about that, but she had lost her $1,000 out here, nothing but her mouth, by the way. So everybody is excited about it while it's going up.
Right.
And, all I know is if you go far enough to the North Pole, you end up south. And Las Vegas just keep getting larger. That means that a house keeps winning, at least, more than everybody else. And so I think this is a critically important conversation. I'm honored to be part of it. Let me also say, and by the way, we represented Operation all races of people. It's more poor whites than poor anybody else. We have 20% of our offices in rural white America, and we're in Latino communities, et cetera, Asian communities as well. But I think the black conversation is very interesting here because of the interesting history in there.
Yeah.
And I'm going to do this very quickly. Why are we cynical?
Yeah.
Why are we indexing so high on this? It's very simple. We couldn't create capital because we were capital.
Yeah.
When we were slaves, we were bought, traded, insured, invested, underwritten, right? Weren't paid for our labor. I mean, we had to work for free for 270 years. Can breed a little distrust. Then we get free. Yippee, we're free, we're broke. There's a bank called the Freedmen's Bank. You chartered it, not you, the OCC chartered it. Brilliant story. Unfortunately, Lincoln was killed. And we can talk about it later on in the session, but the short version is it failed. It failed, as you know, because, yes, there were people manipulating it at the Home Office when Lincoln was assassinated. But also because of good intentioned people out in rural areas with no financial literacy, who looked like me, who ran branches that weren't legal. Maybe it's the first time I'm saying this, but they were not OCC chartered branches. It was only chartered to be in the District of Columbia, the Freedmen's Bank, but it was in 38 communities. And those numbers, the ledger, talking about ledgers, she's talking about a different ledger, but we'll talk about that. Those ledgers weren't matching up. Luckily, your ledgers are.
We've got a Bitcoin blockchain for that.
Amen. And blockchain technology is brilliant, but this was not matching up, and people didn't have the financial literacy to understand that goodwill alone and lending to good people wasn't enough. They were resisting a system that didn't serve them, so that's why they were doing it. So for good intentions, they had bad numbers and a bad plan, and the whole thing imploded. And you fast forward, the FHA didn't give black folks loans in the 1930s, and go to World War II, and you couldn't get the GI Bill loans, and 1% of blacks got GI Bills, and Dr. King was assassinated trying to talk about money in 1968. So, do people have trust issues? You bet. And am I surprised they're running to an alternative system? This was triggered after 2009. Mm-hmm. I mean, Bitcoin, I think, was founded in the backdrop of the 2009 economic crisis, where these were rich white kids out protesting against capitalism, right? And so I think it was just a confluence of events where people were genuinely, uniquely frustrated with the structured system that has given birth to something that clearly is not going away.
And Tanya, in your experience in the Bitcoin community, how much of that history is kind of informing, why minority communities of color are so interested in crypto? Is that kind of in the background? Is that in the foreground? Like, I know that there's that book, Bitcoin and Black America, fascinating because it really touches on some of this. Is it your sense that that's one of the motivating factors?
It is. I'll say it this way. I don't know if it's at the forefront of people's mind. The context of the history is critically important because it sets the stage for why there's faster adoption of various types of crypto assets in the space, not the least of which obviously is Bitcoin, but there are over 19,000 different types of coins and tokens.
Can you say that again?
Over 19,000.
I only knew one. I'm not, slight exaggeration.
Which in some sense speaks to your concerns about the proliferation of coins and tokens in the space, or even how to distinguish between a native coin and a token that records its transactions and balances to an existing ledger. What is the current state, but also the historical lens that we have to view the possibility for economic justice with this alternative that doesn't require the access control of a bank or a government, although it exists within the larger framework of banks and government.
Right.
So is there a bridge between traditional finance and crypto assets? But it all has to be calibrated for the context. The reason, the vacuum, the void that was created by a system of gatekeepers that have not treated Black and brown communities in the same way, didn't provide the same level of transparency, didn't provide the same access to the capital that is necessary, not just in one generation, but as a matter of generational wealth. You can't even get to dynastic wealth, but just wealth in one generation that is preserved largely through capital assets and capital investments. And because crypto assets are taxed largely as a capital asset, it presents a really interesting opportunity for alternative means of transfer of value and the growth of value over time if you're playing the long game.
Maybe help a little bit of level setting. You say that Bitcoin, crypto, blockchain technologies don't have to rely so much on banks. Can you explain the technology a little bit for folks who want to just get oriented, and then we can kind of build from
And
there?
I think we should come back to another point she just made, Comptroller, that she said the word capital asset, the phrase capital asset versus currency.
Yep.
And I would have said 2 years ago, this is not a capital asset or currency. Now I'm making progress. I'm saying it's a capital asset, so we're at 50% of the agreement. But I think that's a really important statement for her to make, by the way. I agree with her, that it is a capital asset. It is not yet a currency, but it's called crypto.
Hold that thought. We'll get into stable coins later, but
He's trying to discipline me. I'm over here. I'm trying to be a good boy.
No, this is good. Well, we're gonna cover all these things. We've got time, but I think it's good a little bit of level setting on the technology so that folks can kind of keep up with kind of where we're going to be going. So just maybe a little bit of background. I'm sure you've done this a lot of times.
Absolutely. I wish I had my PowerPoint and charts and graphs. I love a good graph, but let's lean into this as level setting today. And also lean into the fact that this is a constant education. Yeah. I am constantly learning in the space. I am deemed an expert. I wouldn't call myself an expert, although I have expertised myself in the space because I know more than most. But there's a constant evolution of learning, and that's actually the power and the promise of financial literacy. Cryptocurrency is a bit of a misnomer, as we've said, but the initial type of cryptocurrency, although there were digital assets before Bitcoin was launched in 2009, January of 2009, by this pseudonymous or anonymous person, whoever he, she, or they might be, that decided to combine three different existing technologies for a novel purpose. The internet, peer-to-peer technology, and cryptography, which basically is just a way to encrypt and code messages. And we've been doing that certainly with the first version of the internet and Web 2.0, which is what we're largely living in now. The idea of the more rapid and efficient transfer of messages. Transition to where we are now. People think that we live in, a digital asset or cash world. It's really a digital veneer over this age-old system of double entry ledger. A bit wonky, but follow me. Which basically means that if I send John $100 from my bank account,
please do.
At the end of the day, or wouldn't you rather have $100 worth of Bitcoin?
I'm a capitalist. I'll take whatever I can get.
If I send $100 on, I think people still have checkbooks. I don't know, but let's say I wrote a check, send it. My bank would have to reconcile that and remove it from my account at the end of the day. His bank would have to reconcile the receipt at the end of the day. That time to finality between the time it's really off of my balance sheet, my personal ledger and my bank's to yours is actually not instantaneous. It takes several days. It can be costly and it requires an intermediary, that being the bank.
I used to float check. I shouldn't say that.
See,
to the OCC.
This is why Bitcoin actually, this idea of the double spend problem that evidently or allegedly, my client has no further comment, but let's say someone was actually
I deny all that I just
checks,
said.
right? And by floating checks, it means I actually don't have $100 today. I'm going to write this check. I'm going to send it with very shaky hands and put a postage stamp on it and hope that by the time you actually cash it, the money is actually in the bank. You actually can't do that with cryptocurrency, and we'll stick with Bitcoin as the OG in the space. The idea that Satoshi Nakamoto would try to resolve that double spend problem, that you can always and only spend and send what you have. And we do so purely in a digital fashion, quite unlike the digital veneer that we have. Although so much of our money is actually moved digitally. We wait for our, are we at the end of the month? People are waiting for this direct deposit to hit. People rarely engage with physical cash as well. But the idea of using purely digital cash, and final point, that you have this record that is what we call a ledger, which gets a little bit wonky, but think of blockchain as a digital ledger of transactions and balances in the same way, rough analogy, but a group text. You have 10 people on a group text. I can delete that group text conversation off of my phone, but as long as the 9 others still have that record, it still persists. Fast forward to the idea of value transfers, transactions and balances in a redundant and persistent way is actually a very, very safe and secure way to actually ensure that the Bitcoin that I have today is the Bitcoin that I have tomorrow. And that is the idea of the security of a shared system of updating transactions and balances that is very different from the double entry ledger system.
Okay, that's great. I'm sure we're going to come back to this.
Again and again and again.
Again and again and again, because I think that the technology, it's interesting that I'm glad you brought up the white paper. That white paper it's a really elegant paper because it's very, very short, but it really captures what he, she, they were really getting after. And my understanding is in the Genesis block of that, they make this mention. It's during the financial crisis.
Absolutely.
So there is this link again to kind of a foundational link in mistrust and problems and challenges in the traditional banking and financial system, right? Because you mentions the 2009, I think the UK second bank bailout, and I think that engendered part of the ethos and the kind of the creation myth around this space. But as you point out, it's not a currency. Right? So right now it's a capital asset. John, you wanted to talk about that.
Oh, I want to talk about everything. Can we be here all night? I mean, this is such a fascinating conversation because it's the future. It's everything. We're literally sitting in a moment in history right now on so many levels, but history does not feel historic when you're sitting in it. This feels like another day. But we're talking about this really near Wild Wild West, really the future of everything, which has very little of anything underneath it that's structured, but it's scaling with jet-like speed.
Yeah,
it's scary. It's exciting and it's beneficial to those.
What's scary about it?
The scary part is I know some people using their rent money to buy rent money and retirement money. Look, let me back up. So I've done fairly well. Had nothing to do with Operation Hope. I've got my own ventures, Brian Good Venture. I've done very well. God bless. I'm willing to take, this is progress for me, 3% of my portfolio and invest it in digital currency, all that stuff. And my wife may fall out watching this. She's like, but I'm willing to do that. That's progress for me. I'm not going to take 30%. I'm not going to take 100%. I know people who've taken their retirement because they've seen somebody say, you can't lose, which is a lie, and say they've invested the whole thing. I'm going to use Bitcoin only because that's what everybody understands. You've been educated, it was 19,000, but let me use Bitcoin. And if they bought it at $60,000 per coin, you're having a bad day right now.
Notionally. Notionally.
No, if you got to pay your rent, it's not notionally, it's real. If you got to pay your mortgages, you're trying to retire, and you're trying to go buy something else and cash out. You bought it at 60, it's now 40, whatever the number is now. You're down by 2/3. That's not notionally, that's real cash. Now, if you're staying in it, if you're somebody who has elegance and understand elegance of finance and some liquidity, this is exactly my point. If you can afford to lose it, it's no different than going to Las Vegas or betting on GameStop, or these are bad examples, and I'm not giving a direct analogy, but I do believe it's speculative. I really do. And there's no asset base underneath it.
Can I pause you one?
Yes, please.
Remember where you are, but I don't want this to persist, at least the counter narrative about the fact that, or the assertion that there is nothing underneath it. and we had a really great conversation about this as the lead up to compare and contrast the traditional finance and banking system to that of crypto assets. And again, let's stick with Bitcoin, although I will say it functions a little bit differently because there's a hard cap of 21 million Bitcoin that will ever be in circulation. 19 million of those coins are already in circulation before traditional finance even figured out what's going on. So it truly is the people's money. And that makes it, we analogize it to gold in terms of being a hard cap. That's to the side. But the idea that there's nothing underneath it and that therefore leads to the conclusion that it is speculative is a dangerous narrative, because what has been created by the traditional banking system to protect consumers and investors in the space is actually coded into open source software that's public facing. Not everybody speaks in code or can figure it out, but it is there and fully transparent for people to see. The point of blockchains is to have coded rules and regulations, the rules of engagement that we have created an entire financial and legal system to support our existing structure is actually used in the software that in a transparent way actually has public facing rules. So you can decide to participate or not based upon the rules of that relevant blockchain. So it's not fair to say that there's nothing underneath that gives some sense of what the rules are about what happens when you actually purchase a crypto asset in general, but Bitcoin in particular.
So we've had our first disagreement. Love, respect. We disagree. I respect you. I've already said I think you're brilliant. I just disagree. I think it's different. I think it's valuable to those who value it, and it's valuable to those who are members of it. It's like having, to me, the most valuable limited edition gym membership. There's only 100 gym memberships in the world, and you got one of them. And if you believe that gym's going to be around forever, and there's a bunch of people trying to get into it, supply and demand would suggest, and they're using it, that of course the use goes up, the value goes up. So it has an embedded value for those using the gym membership. I get that. Maybe I decide I don't want to go to the gym anymore. Maybe the gym implodes. Maybe somebody steals the gym. I don't know. Maybe somebody cuts all the lives of the internet. They want to declare war and the whole thing goes dark. And now
against the gym. I'm still following.
Yeah, well, that's what a trip. I went to the gym and back to crypto.
I just want to follow.
But I was trying to make this simple for people watching it.
Yes.
That say, if you take this limited edition crypto, in this case Bitcoin, which is finite, if you can think about it as a gym membership, it's based on use and a lot of other things, but I don't believe it's based on a fundamental asset value. Like if a company goes south of the border, even if that company begins to fail, you can repackage the asset of that company and sell it to somebody else and get a pure asset value. If I own real estate across the street from this building and everything goes south of the border, I can still go kick that piece of real estate and sit on it if I want to. And they aren't growing any more land, and land has gone away since the beginning of time and arguably won't. So I do think it's different. Let me now say this, though. I'm actually not arguing against cryptocurrency. People think, they follow me on social media, that I'm against cryptocurrency. I am not. I'm against somebody losing their rent money. I'm against people thinking that this is a automatic path to riches, and the most ridiculous thing is that this is somehow a assault against the man, whoever the man is, and we're going to rebel against governments in the world. Ridiculous. Let me tell you, entrepreneurs have never made more money or built more wealth than when the government regulated something. If you've done it properly, think about FDIC insured banks. Like, no, if you try taking an FDIC insurance off of a bank, side of a bank, and have somebody walk by now, it's Joe's Finance Company, and see how many deposits you get. So this is where there's been this incredible social contract between regulatory environment, regulatory framework, and these sort of hardwired, aggressive entrepreneurs who initially didn't want regulation, and still arguing about it.
And let's talk about that too, because a way to connect the conversation about the benefits, the pros and cons for the minority community in the space is to your original point about what the historical context and the context at the time when Bitcoin was first released. What were cypherpunks? Which are when you think of the space of crypto, it's kind of like the financial institution, and also you have those who may have a more libertarian bent that actually do want to opt out of the current system, do want to go off the grid, and wanted to find a way in order to transact value without governments participating. That actually, I wrote an article on Medium that is an overlay between cypherpunk ethos and spirit, which is really the spirit of community that wanted to find an alternative method of transacting value, and Kwanzaa principles, quite frankly, when you think of cooperative economics, collective work and responsibility, self-determination principles of doing things on your own time and your own dime. And there's a really interesting overlay of what gave rise to that as well.
So, well, I wasn't finished with my sentence.
Yeah, so I think we got two threads. Yeah. Let's finish them both. So one is on the tangibility.
Yeah, all I was going to say was that if you look, New York City is arguably the largest economy in the U.S. It has 3 times more going on economically than Washington, D.C. and capital flows. But it doesn't work without roads, gutters, subways, infrastructure, legal systems, oversight. But with that, everybody has comfort and safety that there's rules of engagement and it has attracted capital. Likewise, as you gave the bank example, I think that this space will 10x itself, maybe 100x itself in value if and when there can be a marriage of safety and soundness, to overuse a phrase, and the entrepreneurial spirit that is right now running loud. And for the person who says, I don't want the government, I don't like the rude guy who showed up at my house with financing offer. But when he offered me, 2% money, I said, you're rude, but I'll take the 2% money. I really do believe that when you have emotions in business, you're going to make the wrong decision. At some point, people are going to make a rational decision. And I think the rational decision is that we're better together.
So, John, because I think there's this cultural discussion. I definitely want to hit that. But I want to come back for a second. Because you say something that's a little bit contradictory.
That's me.
I mean, look, this is a contradictory space. So this is a place where we're here to kind of talk it out. You think that with the right kind of guardrails, regulation, that this 10x, 100x.
Yeah.
Under that logic, shouldn't people go in now? So one of the reason I say it this way, shouldn't people buy now? Mm-hmm. And I am not saying that. So please don't take that out of context. But I'm saying I've heard this. I've heard this now from certain communities. I had a meeting.
The answer is depends. Go ahead.
It depends. But I had a meeting with, I meet with lots of different groups. I meet with bankers, but more important than bankers, community groups, academics, various others. And with some of the community groups I was meeting with Asian Americans, a bunch of Asian American groups. And I was at every group I asked, like, what about crypto? And it's this very lively discussion. And someone said, oh, Mr. Comptroller, it's like property. So I'm Asian. In the Asian community, property is property, right? This is something that the community really feels they can they have a property and education. Like those are the things that require huge amounts of investment because the presumption is these will pay off. These are investments. And that clicked in my mind in terms of why there's such an attraction. Because mentally for some, it's like, oh, it's like the new property rush. And the idea is to get in early to build the wealth. I don't agree with it. I have enormous skepticism, same as you, John. But at the same time, it's one of those, this makes the conversation really, really interesting because I think some people would say, why would you rob us of the chance to build wealth in that way? And then it comes down to a question of like, well, what is it, right? It depends. There's 19,000. Are all 19,000 coins going to be like that? No. So how do you get smart enough? Can you get smart enough to do that on your own? Or is the whole thing rigged? I think this is part of the dialogue that has to be taking place now. And John, this is financial literacy month. This is the month to kind of learn these things.
And by the way, I think Operation Hope should, we think we have a responsibility. We have this conference coming up on May 20th. And thank you all for being part of that. We'd love to have you there on this, expanding on this topic, on cryptocurrency and digital assets. It's a summit on it, maybe one of the first. But I think that how you feel about this in large part depends on your experience with it.
Yeah.
President Bill Clinton once said, it's hard to get somebody to agree to the truth when a lie is paying their paycheck. This is not a lie, but it is an experience. And if all your experiences are positive and you've made a ton of money, or like you or my wife, fantastic. If you lose your shirt, then this will be the Freedmen's Bank. And if that happens community-wide and we get ahead of our skis, this is the Freedmen's Bank all over again. And you're going to get people even more skeptical of this system. And we'll have 2 steps forward and 5 steps back. Let's slow this thing down. Let's figure out how we do this in a way that is inclusive and sustainable. And I think that education is a piece of it. I actually can't believe this as an entrepreneur. I think regulation is a part of it. I think that one of the reasons that America is the largest economy in the world is it has a great regulatory and legal framework environment. That is the government, right? I think people are all over the world. China wants the people in China put their money in the U.S. These folks all around the world complain about the U.S. and can't wait to invest here because we have this incredible framework. The very thing that we're arguing against is the very thing that actually has given us some strength. I think this is a new innovation that has to be respected, and it has a place. How big of a place? I think we're trying to figure out, but I don't want to bet people. I when people say to me, this can't lose, I'm like, what are you smoking?
Well,
Everything
let's talk
can
about
lose.
that.
You ever heard of Blockbuster?
Blockbuster
was on every corner. Like,
let's talk about that. This is a lot different.
Then Netflix came.
This is a lot different than Blockbuster for a lot of different reasons, and it shows a fundamental misunderstanding and misappreciation of the technology. And I think it's unfair. And I think it's dangerous to categorize this in the way that we're talking about. And this is really important to level set the conversation.
Fantastic.
I don't have the dog in the fight as to whether somebody buys or not, but I think it's critically important that we inform people and provide people the right tools and opportunities to figure it out as a matter of self-determination, agency, and autonomy.
Agreed.
Bitcoin doesn't care if you believe in it or not. It doesn't require the participation and the agreement of us all to say yes before it happens. There is no way to slow down Bitcoin. It exists. It does not exist in a vacuum. So I push back very much on those at the margins who might say that this operates and shouldn't be regulated. Those of us, the significant portion of people those of us who are in the middle, who are very serious about ensuring the safety and security of investors and consumers in this space, want regulatory clarity like yesterday, want legislation that protects people yesterday. I know that we have a blockchain caucus on the Hill that works very hard on the issues that you have raised in order to ensure that people are protected in the space and have the right tools and the right information. The technology does not care. The technology is not going to sit on the side, and to do so positions the United States in a way that will be behind the curve. We have a place called Crypto Valley that's very much like Silicon Valley, but guess where it's not? It's not here in the United States. It's in Switzerland, where people have done really well. I have educated thousands of people at this point since 2017. I do not know. I am not saying that they do not exist. I don't know one person who has put in 100% of their assets for rent money and then had nothing to show for it. That doesn't mean that this is a space that doesn't need to be protected, but the regulatory clarity in the alphabet soup of regulatory agencies to even ascertain the jurisdictional boundaries is really important that we work through. That's why I appreciate so much the president's approach to a perspective at a high level so that there's some integration and agreement and a concerted effort in the space to ensure that the United States stays on the leading edge of technology. If we wait and talk and figure out, it's kind of like I say to my students, learn while you earn in a responsible way. I think that we can do that. And I think that we have to. And I actually think it's irresponsible not to have a full conversation about the diversity of a portfolio in the way that you're approaching it, and certainly the way personally that I approach it as a part of. And that comes back to the idea of education in the space.
I'm going to shock you. Everybody ready?
I don't know. What are you going to say?
I agree with what you just said, with no buts. Let me provide an and. I have 4 million clients at Operation Hope. They're in every state in America. They're mostly low wealth, credible aspiration, credible belief in themselves, different levels of financial literacy. We have had several experiences of people who lost it all in various asset classes, by the way, scams at churches and all kind of crazy stuff, buying Chinese bonds and and some of these sort of nouveau currencies
Absolutely.
that, just they lost it all. They were sold that you can't lose. They didn't have the intellect. And then when they went back to go to try to talk to the folks, there was nobody to talk to.
The website is down.
Poof, it's gone. We've had celebrities pushing currencies and digital assets that were scams, that they didn't realize they were scams, but they used their influence. Poof, that's gone. People have lost millions of dollars they couldn't afford. And I've even gotten emails from people saying, I'm going to dump your entire email box onto the internet unless you send me $1,000 in crypto. And I call the FBI and they go, I'm sorry, we have no division for that. We don't know who to call. There's no there. So I agree with everything you just said. We should be on the cutting edge. America should be investing in this. We should be trying to figure it out. So for the record, I'm with you.
Understood.
I just want to make sure the wheels, I don't want to put a rocket ship on a wagon wheel and have one of the wheels fall off while we have this bold vision.
There is this very interesting dichotomy where, and Tanya, I would like to hear you speak more about the future, because I think there's a lot of where folks, including myself, kind of scratch my heads like, okay, I see enormous amounts of money and lots of very, very smart people running in a direction, and I can't make out where that direction is going. So if you could talk about that a little bit, that'd be great. But there is this really sharp dichotomy between that vision and this very scam-ridden space, where I think last count we had was $3.5 billion last year. Scams, rug pulls, hacks. I mean, every week there's a hack, and they're pretty big. And to John's point, we go back to these are regular people. So this is not just Wall Street, derivatives money. These are regular folks that are disproportionately young, diverse, and underbanked who are in this space. Holding both of these thoughts, I think, at the same time is really hard. I think that this is part of where this cognitive dissonance is. This promise, which is amazing, mixed with this landscape that is horrific, and yet it kind of coexists. I don't know if you have any thoughts on kind of that dynamic, and also spell out for us a little bit like what this kind of Web3 crypto thing is supposed to be.
A two-part question.
Yes, a two-part question.
Usually, that means actually two questions, and both could take the hour, and both are critically important. Let's talk about the harms. It is irresponsible to talk about the promise and the hope without talking about the potential for the scams, the rug pulls that go on every day, and they can devastate an emerging asset class and an emerging ecosystem if they're not under control, to be sure. I remember, so let's also level set here. When you think about the internet, the first real use case for the internet was this little crazy thing called electronic mail, things that we might not even want to open at this point in time. And there was a proliferation at the time of a lot of scams that continue to come when you think about all of the cyber issues that you mentioned as well. One of the biggest issues at the time was I was getting emails, perhaps you were as well, to send $10,000 to someone in Zamunda, and no one said that there was something wrong with the money that was being asked. The harm was the theft. The harm is focused on the fact that someone was using a technology for the purpose of theft and scams and harming people. And then getting and right-sizing the relationship between where is the harm? Is the harm the dollar that they're asking for? Or is it actually the technology that is being used to scam people? This is kind of a both and issue because we have this nascent asset class and we have this nascent technology that most people don't understand. Yeah. Couple that with the access and the fact that people are participating in the space, and that makes it a great concern. Do we have existing laws that would address that? We do. We have some additional issues because of the way that the technology operates that are probably either going to require a sui generis approach, a completely new approach, or can we tweak what we have right now to meet the moment? I think that's probably going to be a both and it does require the approach. We have so many laws that we had to develop over time because of the internet and because of digital assets that existed before crypto assets. We have entire international treaties and conventions dealing with cross-border disputes on digital assets. Those things actually already exist. Is it going to be a natural overlay in the space that we are building for Web 3.0 world? When people are talking about metaverse, it's not a place. It's more of an experience that involves not just blockchain and crypto assets, but also virtual reality, augmented reality, IoT, the Internet of Things, and the like. So there are so many different things that make it up. But I heard somebody describe the metaverse in the same way we used to talk about the information superhighway of the World Wide Web. And now think of, and that was really about the efficient and immediate transfer of information. Information wanted to be free, evidently. Now we think of a Web 3.0 world where it's the rapid acceleration of the transfer of value, that it can inject liquidity in formerly illiquid things, including, and I don't know if you're going to like this, physical, the tokenization of quote unquote real world assets, or the ability, anything that requires a public record that might benefit from actual identification on a non-fungible basis of a specific asset. You might be able to leverage that. You can leverage it in the security. Absolutely.
Yeah, we agree with that. A song.
Absolutely.
Great.
I think this might be the least interesting thing if we look back over time, because the first use case for blockchains is really crypto assets. But think of the other things that would benefit from a persistent, immutable ledger of transactions over time.
We don't disagree on it. I think my creative friends would love to. I mean, this was really 20 years ago what Prince was. Why Prince said, "Don't call me Prince anymore, call me Symbol Man," because he was fighting over the fact that somebody else owned his name and thus the music. And so he wanted to, if it was 20 years ago, he would have had an NFT maybe for each one of his songs. Okay. So I get that. And we're in agreement. When this person sent me this email, what was fascinating was the FBI said, we can't track where that money's going. Like if it's going into a bank account, you can track it. There's all this infrastructure and there's remediation and there's regulatory. But literally, you correct me if I'm wrong, in the case of at least Bitcoin, it just disappears into a untrackable receipt file.
Complete opposite.
Complete opposite.
Complete opposite.
Okay.
There are actually some privacy coins that are of great concern. Monero and Zcash, some of the others or the technology to use a coin mixer to obfuscate the transactions. There is no better way. Actually, Bitcoin is I'll look into my camera. Bitcoin is a terrible way to engage in illegal activity. It's quick on the front end, but companies like Chainalysis are doing a fantastic a job in connection with FBI and others to actually track down things. There's a recent, they may not get 100%, but it's at least 90% of a recent hack or the cyber, theft, where they send you the email and say, send this or we're going to turn over your documents. Chainalysis, the FBI, they're doing a fantastic way because it is an immutable ledger of transactions. There is no better way to follow the money.
Okay, well, educate me. Maybe the comptroller knows this already. You see on TV a utility company shut down. And there's a request for $40 million something, and it's sent through some cyber currency, and they can't find it. Give me 1 minute on that because I know he wants to move on.
So initially it depends on the type of crypto that's being requested. If you send Bitcoin, it's a public-facing ledger that cannot be changed.
Put Bitcoin aside for me.
Privacy coins use a certain technology to obfuscate the chain. It breaks the chain, so it makes it more challenging to put the pieces together. But through a range of methods, some that we know, I teach information privacy law as well. So there are a lot of different technologies. It may be a story for another day to delve in. But this space for a public-facing, permissionless chain and currency is a really bad way to transact on the dark web. There are ways that it can be done, but it's not a great place to actually engage in illegal activity.
So I want to, I think we have about 10 minutes left. I want to kind of maybe where we end is a very more practical question. So for people, regular people who are watching this, who want to know, should I invest in crypto assets or not? We're not giving investment advice here. Where do they go to learn? John, you're all about financial literacy. You're a professor. Where do people go to learn? Because what I found is that there's a lot of materials out there, and most of them are basically onboarding materials to go buy. And so to me, that's a little bit, you had made that comment earlier about, it's a little bit, there's some bias there. Where do people go for unbiased information? So they're aware of all the risks, right? They're going in eyes wide open. I'm just, there's just so many, it's like you said, you were joking earlier, you're spending half a day away from the space makes you,
I have no idea what's going on.
You're like, now I'm a year behind, right? It's like in dog years, which makes it very hard to be literate and confident in that space, which again, as a regulator, makes me very nervous, for kind of regular people who are investing in it. But where can people go? How do people get smart and learn? What do they need to do? Maybe I'll start with you, Ty.
Well, first of all, I've built an entire platform that offers tools and onboarding information from free 99 all the way up. It just depends on the level. I appreciate your point about the number of educational platforms that are tied to some type of exchange that is trying to onboard. What I will say about those is that they are accurate in terms of what wallets are, what an exchange is. Of course, they're going to lean in and say, and oh, by the way, our exchange is the best. Please set up a wallet here. But in terms of the basic 101 fundamentals, I think that's fantastic. You have folks like Andreas Antonopoulos, that have offered over the time. He's an OG in the Bitcoin space, but doesn't push anyone to a particular result, has free 99 access to information. There are a lot of online, like Udemy, and I'm not plugging anyone in particular. I don't have any vested interest in that other than AdvantageEvans.com. But the idea of going to those spaces, they're not selling anything, but there are places and spaces where you can learn to begin to figure out what are wallets, what are the types, how do I create one? How do I create one specifically maybe for Bitcoin or one that holds multiple assets, and how to do that in a legal and compliant way. So that information is there. Final tool, I would lean into a resource like Coindesk.com. It's the #1 resource for information in this space. So you'll learn what's going on, and they have a really good education portal as well.
You want to start a fight on the internet? Say something not positive about Bitcoin, just cryptocurrency, or just not negative, just not positive. And then people would just start, jumping all over you. It doesn't bother me. But this is the reason I trust Professor Evans. She's the first person who has enough confidence to criticize the thing that she actually believes in. I think that, even God says invites criticism. If what you're doing is real, you can handle a little criticism. You can handle a little critique. You should want to be transparent and people to question what you're doing. And so I trust her. And so I would encourage you to check with her. I would also encourage you to check with anything that has a .gov or a .org on a website, because these folks, again, quote President Bill Clinton, it's hard to get somebody to agree to the truth when the lie is paying their paycheck. If they have and it's self-interest, I'm not going to say enlightened, it's self-interest in something, it affects the rational lies as tell rational lies. It affects their outcome and what they have to say to you. I would go to .org organizations that are financial in nature. I'll come to Operation Hope last. I would go to CFPB. I'd go to the OCC website. This is .gov. I'd go to the SEC, who's opined on this. I'd go to the White House website and pull up the executive order. I would get 5 or 10 sources that update their information regularly. I think I've probably missed a couple, FDIC, and that are financial in nature, in New York, the New York regulator in particular. And I'd keep track, because this is changing every day, every week. It's like COVID policy, changed, it's updated on a regular basis. So I would go on a regular basis. I have committed, as a result of all of this, that we have to create a financial literacy, cryptocurrency, and digital asset curriculum at Operation Hope. I think this is a critically important thing, and we don't have a dog in the fight. We're not selling anything. We just, we treat it like securities, like somebody wants to open a securities portfolio. We don't tell you what to buy. Yeah. We don't say whether it's a good investment or not. Here's your risk. Here's what it is. You make your own. Here's the analysis. You make your own decision. Banks, same thing. Here's all the banks. Here's the offers. Here's what it means. You make your own decision. I think that we have 190 offices in 40 states, and we're going to equip all our people within, 30 to 45 days to have the basics, so that we can help folks. This is moving fast and it's not going away.
So I think this is a really good note to end on. There was an event of the Financial Literacy Education Commission. So that's a number of different agencies co-chaired by the Treasury and the CFPB. And we talked about crypto literacy, or the lack thereof,
Mm-hmm.
and the importance of developing these materials, authoritative, that can be helpful. And as part of that effort, they've got this thing called My Money 5, which is all about financial health. So I want to bring this all back down to financial health. Because at the end of the day, the question for me is, how does a given either product or service, how can it improve or hurt financial health for individuals, for communities, for economies? And through that prism, you've got, how does it help me earn money? How does it help me spend money? How does it help me borrow money? How does it help me plan for retirement? You take those dimensions and say, how does this fit? And I think that would naturally lead to don't bet the red check on it, right?
That's right.
Because that's, you have to go back to first principles.
Yep.
How is this going to empower?
Yep.
And I think that that's kind of the shared objective. I think around that, there's a lot to discuss and to debate about how to get there and what the risks are. But I want to thank you both so much for a very lively and hopefully informative and engaging conversation. I know this will be the first of many, many that we're going to have in this space, but I really appreciate it, and hopefully it was engaging for you as well.
Thank you.
Thank you for doing this, Mr. Comptroller, and the OCC.
So stay tuned for, thank you for joining us today. We're going to be continuing this series on financial health in the future, and we look forward to the engagement.